So we are now at lower of cost or market. Okay, so lower of cost or market. In July of 2015, FASB said, oh, I think we should have a simplification project, and we will simplify our standards. The previous standard was the lower of cost or market, which is what we're doing now. And we end up with a replacement cost and ceilings and floors and all of that. And the new standard was we'll just do the historic cost and net realizable value, just what we did, before. No ceilings, no floors. Much simpler. Yeah, that's great. And so their goal was, they said this new guidance is expected to reduce complexity, and it'll just be great. And it's responsive to stakeholder feedback. The trouble is the stakeholder feedback from several industries was very negative. They said it's really going to mess us up if we have to use this. So based on that, FASB said, oh, okay, we'll make everybody do lower of cost or net realizable value, except you guys can still do lower of cost or market. Yeah, so much for simplification. This means that you basically have to learn both methods. So, I don't know. Okay, so let's look at lower of cost or market. Okay, so first we want to look at what's the basic difference between what we just did with the lower of cost or net realizable value. And here we compared the net realizable value to the cost done. With lower of cost or market, we're going to be comparing the cost with a designated market value of the inventory. Okay, what's a designated market value? You start with the replacement cost of the inventory, and that's going to be sandwiched in between a floor and a ceiling. Okay? Makes sense. The ceiling is the net realizable value, which you know what that is. The floor is the net realizable value less a normal profit margin. Okay, so the floor and the ceiling, their basic goal is to reduce any distortion in profits, and so you can kind of get into a little more detail on that if you would like to. Okay, so the general rule is a company values its inventory at lower of cost or market, but the market is limited to an amount not more than the net realizable value, the ceiling, or less than the net realizable value, less the normal profit margin, which is the floor. Okay, so on the notes, I've set up kind of how I set this up. If this works for you, fine. Wiley does it a little differently. I have to work with what makes sense to me. So the setup, I start with the costs. Well, let's look at it. It'd be easier to just plain look at it here. Okay. So this is the same example that Wiley uses on the PowerPoint. So if you're filling out you have to imagine all this was blank. So where do you start? You start by putting in the cost for each item. And then do the replacement cost. That will be given, and that's simple. You don't have to calculate anything. The ceiling, the net realizable value, you may have to calculate because the net realizable value could be given, they might give you the selling price, cost to complete, selling costs, and so you may have to compute your net realizable value. Then once you get that, they'll also give you the normal profit, and so you're going to take the ceiling minus the normal profit, and that gives you the floor. Okay? So your first step is to get it all set up. Once it's set up, now you've got all of this part filled in, you have to choose the designated market, and that's equal to the middle amount of these three. So 88, 104, 120, the middle number is 104. And it would be the same for all the rest of them going down. You pick the middle amount, that's your designated market. Now, on an individual items basis, you would compare the cost, designated market, and choose the lower amount for each item. Okay? So when you get down to the bottom, you get a individual items, total inventory value of 350. The cost was 415, so you need an adjustment of 65 to get it to lower of cost or market. If you're using a sort of a total inventory approach, you just take the total of all your designated markets, compare it with the cost, and you get a different amount. The individual items is obviously more accurate. Okay, so what else do we need to look at here? Okay, Okay, so the evaluation of the rules, I'll leave you to look at this. I can't really embellish anything on that. The international standards, I don't really test you on that, but I think it's, you will need to know that sometime in the future as you're going on in accounting, so I make that available to you. Basically, IGAAP requires net realizable value, and US GAAP, they do both, okay? So that, you can take a look at that as well. I'll do a couple of the brief exercises, just see if that helps.